Good afternoon. My name is Simon Tupman. I am the convener of Law Chat, which is a monthly series of chats with people from the legal sector offering insights and inspiration. Welcome to this edition this August. My guest today is a lawyer and an author who travels the world as an advocate and ambassador for transformative approaches to the law. She's constantly on the move, or at least she was pre-COVID, and has served as, and I quote, a butterfly with a cause. To quote leadership writer John Renesh, touching down wherever there is an active effort to bring about radical change to the legal profession. She serves as a cross-pollinator amongst lawyers active in restorative justice, peacemaking, therapeutic jurisprudence, holistic law, contemplative practices, and many other expressions of this new direction in the practice of law. It's my great pleasure to welcome from Florida today, J. Kim Wright. Kim, good afternoon, good evening to you in Florida, and thank you for joining us here on Law Chat.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
No, it's great to have you here, I'm very interested to start off this discussion with the description from John Renesh there, a butterfly with a cause. You've been on the move for quite a few years, haven't you, coming in contact with people who are actively trying to bring about transformation in the legal profession.
I have. I gave up my house in 2008, at the beginning of 2008. So about a dozen years, and I had intended to keep on for another few years at least, and I have been grounded.
You've been grounded because of COVID-19?
Yes.
Yeah. So while you are grounded, what is preoccupying you at the moment?
Well, it's interesting. I've been saying that I'm not traveling around the world anymore. I'm not having my luggage, but I'm getting around. So I have projects pretty much on every continent, and I don't have to carry a 20-kilo bag. So I'm happy about that piece.
Very good. Look, I'm very interested too to hear more about your background. It was obviously a fascinating description that I read out to introduce you from John Renesh there, and clearly you've been an advocate for a different type of legal system and an advocate for change to the status quo. And I understand that the term that perhaps you didn't coin, but one that you've adapted over the years, is integrative law. Is that correct? And if so, tell us a little bit more about integrative law. What is it? How would you describe it? And what is its history?
Well, I will call it integrative law, and both are correct pronunciations. And as I travel around the world, I'm amazed at how many different ways people can say the same word. So my background was that I actually decided not to be a lawyer because I thought lawyers were jerks. And then I met a lawyer who stood up in the middle of a personal growth seminar and announced that he granted dignity to everyone, and that he thought his job was to make sure that the parties could still be friends. And as a divorce lawyer, he wanted them to be able to raise their children together. And I realized that there was another possibility. And I sometimes tell the story, it's like everything went from black and white to color. My life changed, and I have been carrying that message ever since and practicing in that way. So when he told me about his practice, I opened a practice, and he immediately started trying to be a peacemaker and to actually be holistic and grant dignity to everyone. And I realized that that was not the way the system was actually designed. I had this image of splatting against the courthouse wall. And so I started experimenting with who was doing what and what could I learn from all of these great teachers who were doing things like collaborative law and therapeutic jurisprudence and the things you mentioned, and bringing those into my practice. So after I did that for a few years, somebody said, well, you should really start a magazine. And at that time, there were still print magazines being started. That was not the case very long. And so I thought I would start a magazine and write articles about all these great things. And then as magazines went out of business, I decided to do a website. And there was this really strange alignment of, at this time that I decided to do that, internet shifted and we were able to do videos. So I started videotaping these great teachers and going to conferences or going to their offices or homes and finding out who they were and what they were doing. And so my work has been more of a showcaser, almost like a journalist, of bringing together a lot of different people doing a lot of things. And the name came about when a group of about 30 of us who were leaders in 30 different fields came together to talk about what we had in common and realized that integrative law was the topic that, or was the title of what we were doing together. So,
very interesting, because of course in the last few years, in 2010, you wrote a bestseller there, bestseller for the American Bar Association, Law as Peacemakers, and you followed that up with another book, Law as Changemakers. Was the movement, the integrative law movement, the genesis for those books?
well, I think that the movement has been there and I just saw it. And so when I wrote Lawyers as Peacemakers, I included several other people, and I included the videos that I'd been doing. We turned a really great friend and writer, turned them into little vignettes that were included in the book. And so it was really a collaborative effort. I mean, I got credit as the writer, but there were about 35 people involved in that, in bringing that book together. And then the next book, there are 111 contributors. And again, I get my name on it, but I got to showcase all of those people who were doing these really cool things.
Wonderful. I gather the first one was over 500 pages long.
Yeah, I think it's 562, and the other one's about the same.
Yeah, well,
it's maybe just under 500.
Congratulations on both of those. Now, obviously, in the years since you've been writing and traveling, you've come into contact with many lawyers who might fit the description of integrative, the way they go about running their practices. How would you describe the hallmarks or the characteristics of many of those lawyers?
It's almost like I just kind of sense who they are. But when I was writing the second book, I put out a call to a lot of different people, hundreds of people, and I said, what is it that is integrative law? And write me a piece about that. So I got about 200 pieces and picked out the ones that really seemed to illustrate it. And I literally put them in piles and said, what is this telling me? So the first pile, the first quality of an integrative lawyer has to do with being an integrated, reflective kind of person. And so there's a piece in the book where there's a researcher, a PhD student from Canada, who actually wrote about what it is to be an integrated legal professional, and all the pieces that seem to apply to lawyers. And so it might show up like meditation. There's a lot of meditation going on out there, or yoga, or personal growth. It might just be journaling and just reflecting on our own who we are, you know, what's important to us. And so that seems to be like a path to the next stage, which is about values and purpose. And so I call the first one reflective, and the next stage is about values and purpose. And that really is what's really important to me. And it then spills over into what's important to our clients. And how can we be more client-centered and get the clients that match our values, and be a person who is actually aligned. So that kind of thinking actually shifts to one of the others, and the next two stages are sort of like interchangeable in terms of the order where they seem to appear. But the one that I like to talk about is systemic or design thinking. And so we start thinking differently. We actually, as we start sorting by who we are as values, then we start thinking about, oh, okay, so like there's this system that I'm part of, And if I want my values and my clients' values to actually shape the situation, then I'm bumping up against a system that needs to change as well. And then the other piece is about consciousness, and it's really more of a consciousness of interconnectedness and our place on the planet, not only as human beings, but our connectedness to every being. And all of those are not necessarily a path, but all of those seem to show up among integrative lawyers. And then they say, how can I be me and still be a lawyer? And that's where all of the different approaches come from. So like things like collaborative law and restorative justice and therapeutic jurisprudence don't come from a vacuum. They come from the transformation of the lawyer who says, wait a minute, I need to find a way to practice so that I can still be me and I can still make a living and I can still have, the prestige of being a lawyer or whatever it is we're trying to fulfill. And then create or adopt a new way of practicing.
It's interesting because you and I became first connected probably 20 years ago or so, when I came into contact with Steve Keever, the late Steve Keever, who was a wonderful writer with the American Bar Association. I remember in his significant book, a deeply influential book, at least for me, and I'm sure many other holistic lawyers, Transforming Practices, which I think was published in 1998 or 1999, and I think is still as relevant today as it ever was. I recall him talking about a case study there of a criminal defense lawyer in Florida who, I shan't go with his name because I can't recall accurately, but it struck a chord with me because I had started my career as a criminal defense lawyer and become disillusioned with this transactional nature of just next case, in we go, and I could do nothing about it. And it was because it wasn't expected that my role as a defense lawyer was to do anything more than to process clients through the system. But what was significant about this particular lawyer is that he had transformed himself as an individual to a stage where he said, I want to do something about these people who keep coming and making appointments with me because they're going into court, they're recidivists, they don't know how to change their behaviors to stop offending. And so that he set about in his practice not to just be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but the fence at the top of the cliff, by offering them counseling, by offering them help to say, let's get your life on track. And presumably that description, that type of law, is the sort of person that you are talking about as an integrative lawyer.
That's exactly the kind of shift that happens. It's like when you're starting to look at what's important to you and to your own integrity, and you bump up against a system that is not doing that.
Yeah.
Then you look for ways to be in that system that necessarily shifts that system because you're an element of that system.
And do you find that integrative lawyers can be found right around the spectrum of the legal profession? So corporate lawyers, family lawyers, you name it.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And if you're a corporate lawyer, you might find conscious contracts or values-based contracts and start doing contracts in a different way. If you're a criminal lawyer, you might find restorative justice or the problem-solving court model or family group circles, something like that. And family law, you would find mediation or collaborative law. But that's why I think they're all part of the same movement. They have emerged from the shift that's happening among the lawyers, and they're creating those new models.
You mentioned the shift amongst the lawyers. That shift has traditionally been regarded as being a pretty slow one, given the conservative nature of the legal profession. Nevertheless, we now find ourselves in very interesting times. And over the past 4 months on Law Chat, we've had a number of speakers who've come on to talk about innovation, fresh thinking, challenging the status quo, and how COVID has actually brought about and accelerated much needed change. Would you tend to agree that this pandemic is possibly subtly a cause for good, in that it may make a lot of lawyers and reflect more about what their true purpose in life is?
I have seen a lot of that. I've been contacted by some big law associates who have told me that they're just lost. They're doing something that just doesn't make a difference, and they're looking for something that can make a difference. And that this crisis has really sort of expanded their need to be doing something that makes a difference, and it's just not happening in their law firm. And I, I see that happening with people being more authentic, because when we're here on Zoom, we the phone might ring, a child might come in, a dog, that we are starting to have less of that professional facade and starting to become more real with each other. And as we become more real with each other, then we start actually being able to check in with ourselves and do that reflection. Yes. And if we're reflecting more, then that sort of starts that cycle that I was mentioning.
Because before COVID came along, of course, many commentators, perhaps yourself included, would have said that the legal profession was in a state of crisis. And I think I read on your website, you referred to Professor Susan Daycoff talking about the tripartite crisis in the legal profession, tripartite referring to a crisis in well-being, a crisis of reputation, and a crisis of civility. Do you feel that integrative law is in many ways a panacea to the crisis?
Well, Susan Daycoff actually did research on the crisis, the misery that was happening in the legal profession, and she came across lawyers who did not fit the standard mold, and they tended to be lawyers who were practicing what she then called comprehensive law in the beginning. And in her early research, she just, she would come across people who were doing therapeutic jurisprudence or collaborative law or restorative justice. There were 5 or 6 different models that she saw that people were actually happier. Yeah. And so this is sort of the prescription for misery in the legal profession, is to become a more whole person, operating according to your values, raising your consciousness, thinking about your place in the system. All of those things actually help to sort of relieve all of the symptoms of the legal profession. The other thing that's happening is that the law has changed really slowly. My mother did a closing recently, and I swear they must have used the same forms in 1950. I mean, they had not changed. There was no plain language. There was nothing. And I took plain language drafting in the 80s. so it's really, really, really slow. But lawyers kind of are at least 20 years behind. I saw a study once that we were 20 years behind, major changes that were happening in society. It's a good thing, because we're a profession that's about providing certainty. And, the legal system gives people, sort of that certain, safe space. But then when things are changing as rapidly as they have been, the legal profession gets in the way of progress that actually must happen, with all of the things we're discovering in neuroscience and a lot of other topics. The law is not keeping up with the science. And so we've been in that kind of push-pull of, we want to change slowly, and precedent is what matters, and all of that. And things are changing so rapidly, we have to do that. And lawyers have been kind of holding on and kind of being the weight that keeps some things from going forward, and keeps change at bay. We've all had to change, like mediation in ODR, online dispute resolution, was going to happen in 20 years. And it happened overnight. And so it's like the muscle of change is now more available to us. And for me, that's a really good thing.
Is that largely thanks to technology, do you think?
Yeah, I love technology, but I think lawyers have been really resistant to technology too.
Oh, I think
I was an early adopter. I had the first website in the state of North Carolina as a lawyer, possibly in the country, back in the 90s. I had a lot of questions and answers. I would hear from people in other countries asking me to explain things that I had on my website. And, I beta tested software, I got all the toys, whatever. So I'm not a technophobe, but I think that the real excitement is about the human piece. Like, AI is going to come do all the monotonous stuff. And now the human connection, which we can provide when we're being more conscious, is what's exciting to me about law.
So you certainly detect a change in consciousness, if I can call that, or awareness in many quarters in the legal services industry. We're not just talking lawyers, but also presumably legal professionals working in firms. What do you think, what tips rather, would you offer people who are feeling that your words are striking a chord with them today? What can they do to help accelerate the culture of consciousness, if you like, in their respective businesses or practices or firms?
I think that they can actually lead by following. There's actually in organizational development, there's a whole line of work about that, which is to do their own work. Like when I'm working with people as a coach, one of the first things I do is I have them actually get really clear about who they are, what their values are, and do the reflective work themselves. And then start looking for, how do I bring that to my client work? So everything else can stay the same and you can become a better listener. And that will impact your client work. And a lot of really good listeners become very successful lawyers because lawyers are not known for that. It's a market benefit to be a really good listener, and so those sorts of things. The people I really enjoy working with are those who are, striking out and inventing new things. But you can wherever you are, you can do that.
I mean, it sounds at the very center of all of this is humanity and a sense of empathy with all those people around you.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about empathy in law, just not that many years ago would have gotten you laughed out of the room. And I know that because I went to a bar conference and I started talking about empathy and healing as a lawyer back in maybe 2007 or so. And it might have been a little sooner than that. And people actually got up and left the table at lunch. I was left sitting by myself. It was like middle school hell.
Wow.
I was at a table full of people. I started talking about healing. I started talking about lawyers having empathy and all of that. And it was like, we got to get away from this woman, and they all left me sitting there by myself. And so that was the profession at that point. And just a few years later, my book, Lawyers as Peacemakers, was a bestseller. And so that is a little bit of a measure of the progress that the law is making.
I think it is a great measure, Kim, and it's also makes me think about the discussion we had last month with Jerry Riskin, the management consultant from Edge International, who said that, particularly in North America, there's often a tendency amongst managing partners, even amidst the COVID crisis, to sort of say, well, have you done this and have you done that? And, how's the budget going? Rather than saying, how are you? How are you, mentally as well as physically? And I detect from that very simple piece of advice is that a lot of leaders at this stage are having to re-examine their attitudes towards their people and towards their own lives and practices by saying, look, all of a sudden we have this tsunami that's just washed over traditional practice and makes us have to reconsider how we go about conducting ourselves as human beings within our practices on a daily basis. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. COVID's been a really horrible thing, but it's also caused some things that are that are refreshing, and that is that increased humanity, that sense that we're all in this together.
Yes.
And it's really impacted the profession as well.
I want to ask too, do you think there is a generational dimension to these discussions? Do you think that the younger generation are more receptive to your advocacy compared with some of the dinosaurs that you and I may have come across in recent years?
Sometimes. As you asked that question, I remembered being in Columbus, Ohio, and I was just doing a workshop. And they were getting continuing ed credit for it, and so there were a lot of people sitting in the back reading their newspapers, as they do. And I lead a very interactive workshop, and so it becomes really obvious when people are not listening. But there was one man who was paying really close attention, and at the end he stood up, and I could tell he was really important. Like, everybody looked at him as the elder of the legal profession there. He stood up and he said, "This is the profession I wanted to join, what you're describing. And when I was a young man, it was more like what you're describing. And then we lost something along the way." And a lot of people think that is a result of the billable hour, but for whatever reason, he said, "We lost something. I have not enjoyed practicing law for decades, and you have just given me the hope that I can finish my career doing something I really like." So yeah, a lot of young people get it immediately, but a lot of the people that you would look at and say, this is a dinosaur, they'll never get it, it really touches them.
Do you think that universities are doing enough to give students hope or to shape their thinking at an early stage of their career?
I almost laughed out loud. No, I don't think. There's some that are leading the way, and I'm really proud of them. But as things get tough, the courses that drop out seem to be those really innovative courses that are about your professional identity and things like that, and they just want to teach to, there's going to be an exam about. And I just taught a conscious contracts course at Quinnipiac Law School in Connecticut, and so I know that there are things like this happening that are really exciting. There are people teaching restorative justice and collaborative law, but it's still the minority. And so there's a lot of room to go. In India, I'm on a board of directors of an organization. It's a new organization called Law Essentials. And the students have actually started their own podcast so that they can learn the things they want to learn. And so we're going to be doing a whole series on an integrative law in India for the students. And I'm just now starting, but in the past they've had like 1,000 students on the call, so it's already a significant force. And then a colleague of mine in South Africa found the same thing, is that the students came to her and they really wanted to learn about this stuff, but it wasn't on their curriculum.
That sounds very exciting, and I encourage you to keep up the good work that you've been doing the past 25 odd years. I found chatting to you today very inspirational. I hope our listeners have done as well. Kim, before you go, as I normally do with these chats, I just let people know what's coming up next month. And coming up next month, I've got a chat with a couple of key commentators, I guess, in this field. George Beaton, who'll be known to many people, particularly in Australasia, from Beaton Global, the executive chair, and also his partner, John Huxley. And they'll be talking about client centricity. And we're getting together at 4 p.m. New Zealand time on the 10th of September. And we'll be recording that as well. If you register and unable to attend, just as people have done today, then you'll be able to watch it subsequently. But for now, Kim, thank you so much. It's been a great honor talking to you today and learning more about your work in integrative law and the movement. I think it's fair to say the legal services industry has been and is at a major crossroads, and there's a great deal that many individuals collectively can do to bring about much needed change. So thank you for your inspiration, and I wish you and your family well over there in Florida, and I hope it won't be too long before the butterfly resumes flight and is able to cross-pollinate even further around the globe. So for now, Kim Wright, take care, and thank you for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.